Okay, now we're going to talk about system of linear inequalities. We've already talked about regular linear inequalities, but with systems we're going to be graphing two inequalities on one graph and trying to find the shaded region that satisfies both inequalities. So again, we need to remember it's a solid line if it's less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. Dotted or dashed line if it's less than or greater than. Shade above is if it's greater than or equal to. Shade below if it's less than or equal to. And again, remember it's easier when the inequalities are in slope-intercept form. So let's look at some examples. So here y is greater than 3x minus 4 and y is less than or equal to negative 2/3 x plus 3. So again, I want to graph both of these on the same graph, but one at a time. So the first inequality, the y is by itself, so it's in slope-intercept form. So that means 3 is my m and negative 4 is my b. So I would start at negative 4 on the y-axis. Since m is 3, I go up 3 over 1. Now it's a dotted line. Now, we'll get to the shading here in a second. What I like to do is just label this as L1 because it's the first line that I drew, so I can remember when I talk about shading here in a second. The second line, again, the y is by itself, so it's in slope-intercept form. So negative 2/3 is my m, positive 3 is my b. So I start at 3 on the y-axis, go down 2 to the right 3, and since it's less than or equal to, it's a solid line. And I like to label this line 2 because it's the second line that I drew. Now let's talk about shading. Greater than means above, so it needs to be above the first line, but it also needs to be less than the second line. So here's the first line we drew. Above means it needs to be on this side. So above the first line, but it has to be below the second line because it's less than. So here's the second line, it has to be below that. Here's the first line, it has to be above that. So I would shade in all this area. Let's do another one. Y is less than y is less than or equal to x plus 1, or y is greater than or equal to negative 2x minus 1. Again, in slope-intercept form, the y is by itself. So there's an imaginary 1 here, so that's m, and b is also 1 in this case. So I start at the b, which is 1. M is 1, so I go up 1 over 1. It's less than or equal to, so it's a solid line. The second line, also in slope-intercept form, it's got a greater than or equal to. So m is negative 2, b is negative 1. So I start at negative 1 because that's b. Since m is negative 2, I go down 2 to the right 1. Since it's equal to, it's also a solid line. So again, this was the first line we drew, so that's L1. This is the second line. So our shading in this case needs to be below the first line, but above the second. So this is the first line, so below it would be down here, but it has to be above the second line, so we're talking this area here. Let's look at example 3. X is greater than 3 and y is less than negative 2. Again, remember, if I just have one variable, it's either going to be a vertical or horizontal line. If it's x, it's a vertical line. So this is a vertical line at x equals 3. Now it doesn't have the line underneath, so it is going to be a dotted or dashed line. So we got a dashed line at 3. And that's line 1. Line 2 is a horizontal line because it's y. So we go down to negative 2, and we're going to have a horizontal line, and it's also going to be dashed. So that's line 2. Now our shading in this case needs to be above the first line, but again, since it's a vertical line, above means to the right, but below the second line because that's less than. So to the right of the first and below the second, so we're talking this little small area down here. Number 4, y is less than 2x minus 3 and 3x plus 2y is less than 6. The first equation here is in slope-intercept form. The y is by itself. So 2 is my m, b is my negative 3. So I start at negative 3. I go up 2 over 1. Doesn't have the line underneath, so it's a dashed or dotted line. So that's line 1. Now line 2, since it's in standard form because the x and the y are on the same side, I want to put it in slope-intercept form. So this x term, I need to move to the other side. So that gives me 2y is less than, again, when I change the side, got to change the sign. So negative 3x. 6 is still positive. Then I divide everything by 2. So I get y is less than negative 3 over 2x. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now that it's in slope-intercept form, negative 3 over 2 is my m, positive 3 is my b. So I go to positive 3. M is negative 3 over 2, so I go down 3 to the right 2. It's also a dotted line. There's my second line. Now, these are both less than signs, so it needs to be underneath both lines. So here's my first line, so underneath it's these sections, but since this is my second line, underneath both lines would be this little triangle area there.